Hello and welcome to Wine Wednesdays. I'm Freddie Arredondo, winemaker at KVB Estate Winery, and behind the camera is Carrie Arredondo, our marketing and events manager. Welcome to our Quincy location. This is where all of our vineyards are and where our production facility is, so where all the wine is made, all the magic happens. Behind me is our Carroll's Cabernet vineyard. This is our Old Vines Cab. So we use this block to make our lovely Old Vines Roman numeral series. So we're standing in the piazza, or Carrie's standing in the piazza, and we use this area to do tastings, reserve tastings on the weekends during the summer. And reservations are open now, so if you want to hop online, kvb.com, and make your reservations to visit us this summer and do a tasting in the tasting room. So Carrie, what are our questions this week?
So our question this week comes from a dear friend, Alan Williams, and Alan was wondering about yeast. So specifically, he wants to know, have you explained a little bit about yeast, what it is, why we use it, but also what yeast you pick for the KVB wines, why you pick those, and just a little bit of anything that you think might be of interest to our guests.
That's a great question, and yeast is such a broad topic. I'm going to try and condense it down and hit some high points. And if people want to ask more specific questions about yeast, then we can absolutely address those. So first of all, there are two types of winemaking practices. One that uses native yeast and one that uses cultured yeast. So I'm just going to explain what those two are really quick. So native yeast exists everywhere. It exists on the grapes as they come in. It exists in the atmosphere. It exists in your kitchens, in your homes. It exists everywhere. And so you can make wine using native yeast strains that exist on the grapes and in the production facilities. Here at KVB, we actually don't use native yeast. I have done some experimenting with native yeast, but we have a lot of other yeast strains within our native yeast population that makes it a little bit difficult to finish the alcoholic fermentation. So yeast basically just consumes the sugar and produces alcohol and carbon dioxide, which is the fermentation process. So with our native yeast strains here, we've actually done some studies, and the native population has a lot of non-Saccharomyces yeast. Now, the yeast that actually ferments wine all the way through is Saccharomyces cerevisiae is the name of the type of yeast. And that's kind of like saying the human race, though. There are many variations of Saccharomyces cerevisiae that can produce different flavors, different aroma compounds in the wine, but it has to be that type of yeast strain. There are other types of yeast, things like Clechera, Decara, Candida. Those are other types of yeast strains that also can ferment, but they typically don't have a great alcohol tolerance. So once they've eaten some of the sugar that's there, then they start eating other stuff and they start producing these kind of weird, random off flavors and aromas. So we don't necessarily want a lot of those what are considered spoilage yeasts, and we want to really focus on the yeasts that are going to ferment the alcohol all the way through, ferment the sugar all the way through, and finish that fermentation in the wine. So very quick answer to a very long, complicated question.
Thank you for that, Freddie. Hey, Freddie, before we go, I'm sure a lot of people are wondering, with Easter right around the corner on Sunday, if there are any wines, KVB wines, that you would recommend with some of the traditional fare of Easter. So maybe let's go with ham and maybe lamb in case people have an Easter dinner as well.
Those would be great Easter meal choices. So I think with ham, two wines I would recommend. I think our Gewürztraminer does really well with ham, especially when there's a honey glaze on it. But also if you want a red wine, Sangiovese does tremendously well with ham, with baked ham. As far as the lamb, depending on how it's prepared, but like, okay, so I'm thinking a roasted leg of lamb, that would go really well with our Malbec. If you've got something that's has a little bit different flavor, like a grilled lamb chop, then I think something more like an Old Vines Merlot would be fantastic with that type of lamb.
Sounds delicious. Thank you, Alan, so much for your questions.
Thank you all. See you next week.
Happy Easter, almost.